Glory to Jesus Christ. Today we celebrate the feast of the Holy Virgin Theotokos of Guadalupe. Last year I gave you a long homily on this feast. It gives a great deal of important detail on the origin, history, context, meaning, consequences, and take-home lessons of this feast that you won't find easily at all, and certainly not in any other single place, or even just a few places. I've delivered it 7 or 8 times in the past 10 to 12 years. This year, however, because Father Adam recorded it last year, and is therefore available to listen to on our parish website, tonight I'd like to add to it rather than repeat it. I highly recommend that any of you who did not hear it previously would like to refresh your knowledge of this feast, listen to it. My previous homily started with St. Luke and traveled from Israel to Constantinople, to Rome, to several important places in Spain, voyaged with Columbus, entered Mexico of the Aztecs with Cortez, before I even got to St. Juan Diego and Our Lady of Guadalupe. Tonight, I would like to start in prehistoric Mexico about 3,000 years ago and add a little more Mexican context to the ongoing miracle of Our Lady, the Theotokos of Guadalupe. This particular homily is based to a large extent on the quite new and cutting-edge but very solid scholarship of Joseph Julian Gonzalez and Monique Gonzalez in their 2023 book, Guadalupe and the Flower World Prophecy, How God Prepared the Americas for Conversion Before the Lady Appeared, from Sophia Press, which I quote freely. By the way, as an aside, I don't recommend that book as your first book on Guadalupe. It's a little too focused and a little too deep for that. But it's got some great entirely new presented to the world and bringing up some scholarship that's really developed in the last 10, 20 years. Through his divine providence, God prepares people everywhere and in every age in exactly the right ways at exactly the right time to receive the gospel revelation of Jesus Christ. A long-standing early Christian doctrine called Praeparatio Evangelica, evangelical preparation, explains that God prepared pre-Christian peoples and cultures to receive the gospel message before its arrival. So it was as well, of course, with the indigenous people of the Americas. For close to 3,000 years, the people of Pan-Mesoamerica were supernaturally pointed in one direction, and that was their Christian conversion through the fulfillment of the appearance of the Theotokos of Guadalupe in 1531. The indigenous people of Mexico believed that there existed a resplendent paradisal realm, perfect and incorruptible, where death did not exist. The earthly, tangible flower served as a reflection of the ultimate beauty existing in their idea of heaven, the flower world paradise. This place of extraordinary beauty, of vibrant colors and endless song, was the place that Pan-Mesoamerican people hungered to go to after death, an eternal home where they would be united with the beauty of their Creator. This floral, paradisal realm would form the basis of the Pan-Mesoamerican concept of life after death, as well as their concepts of beauty, truth, music, and goodness being given in their fullness only by the one God above all others from their flower world heaven above. Archaeologists have discovered traces of belief in the flower world paradise from nearly 3,000 years ago, and it would provide a conceptual bridge to understanding to help the Mexican people believe in and accept Jesus as the way to eternal life. This belief was shared by multiple indigenous peoples such as the Hopi, the Tohono O'odham, the Paiute, and other American Southwest groups, as well as the Nahua, and other peoples of Mesoamerica. And while each culture had a different name for the realm, all shared a commonality. Because the belief is found over such a wide geographical area, many scholars believe that it must be a very ancient concept. Worthiness to enter heaven was a real problem. Many thought that kings and perhaps warriors dying in battle, and perhaps mothers dying in childbirth, and perhaps humans sacrificed might be worthy despite their sins, but no one else, and perhaps not even anyone except kings. This caused great anxiety, and as you can well imagine. Sacrificing other humans in large number to pagan gods shows both how desperate they were and how little it was working to make them worthy to enter heaven. Their pyramids were similarly futile attempts to create flower mountains with cave entrances and tunnels filled with pictures of flowers in order to climb up from this world to flower world paradise, or at least point to it and begin to attempt the journey. Of course, their use of the pyramids for human sacrifice, though intended to help make them worthy for heaven, were futile at best. They believed that Flower Mountain was ruled by a female goddess, whereas Flower World Paradise was ruled by the male one god who ruled over all the other gods. Of particular relevance to this feast, they passed a key oral myth in song regarding Flower World prophecy from generation to generation for 3,000 years throughout the peoples of Mesoamerica. The myth song begins with the listeners being introduced to the protagonist, who is simply referred to as a singer. His motive is to find beautiful, precious flowers so that he can gather them in his tilma to show them to the princes and his lordly friends. In the very first line, he states his purpose, quote, "Where will I gather the holy, fragrant flowers?" End quote. He addresses the question to the butterflies and hummingbirds, as well as to the jingle bell birds and the trogon birds. In response, the birds and nature itself direct him to a flower world paradise where he hears sweet music sounding like the songs of a multitude of birds, with the sound echoing around him as though the mountain of this otherworldly place was itself singing. The singer then seems to find a multitude of precious flowers and proceeds to pluck the various flowers and gather them in his tilma. Filled with overwhelming joy and gladness, he proceeds to give praise to his creator God. However, all is not what it seems. As soon as he is happy in his finding, he realizes reality is not as he wished it to be. He did not actually find the flowers. The song then becomes a lament when he fully comprehends that he was only given a glimpse of the flower world paradise and that he only imagined fulfilling his wish to gather precious flowers. He concludes that he did not fulfill his quest because he was not worthy and without sin. With a bleeding heart, he deplores his sorry state and bewails that he might never be able to enter the flower world paradise. The story ends on a note of complete and utter despair. This is the myth that they pass on from generation to generation to generation. You can see that they need something desperately. An essential element of the story is that the hero does not want the flowers only for himself, but to share them with everyone else. It is a communal desire. Even these pagans believe that only the God of all, or as they would say, the God of the far and the near, can make one who sins on earth worthy to enter paradise. Only 2 years before Our Lady of Guadalupe visited Mexico, Bishop Zumárraga wrote to the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, in August of 1529, quote, "I think it well to inform your majesty of what is happening now, because it is something so important that if God does not intervene to provide an instant remedy, this land is on the verge of being lost forever." This is the Bishop of Mexico writing about the situation in Mexico 2 years before Our Lady appeared. He's writing to the emperor. 5 years prior to the bishop's letter in 1524, the future St. Juan Diego and his wife were among the first and very few indigenous to be baptized and become fully practicing Catholics. I'll just mention at this point that everything was going wrong in terms of the conversion process. They weren't getting hardly anybody. There was just total culture clash between what the Spanish priests were bringing with them and what the Mexican people believed. I'll just set that stage. It just wasn't working. At dawn on Saturday morning, December 9th, 1531, 2 years after the bishop's letter, an elderly indigenous man named Juan Diego was walking 13 miles south to attend Mass at the parish church. It was at this time that Our Lady, pregnant with our Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ, intervened with the great new evangelization of Mexico. As Juan passed by the hill of Tepeyac on the western side, he heard sweet music coming from its summit. Like the song of many precious, quote, this is him speaking, this is a quote, "like the song of many precious birds, their songs exceeded the songs of the jingle bell bird and the trogon bird, and other precious birds, end quote. The sounds echoed around him as though the hills were singing back to these extraordinary birds. Surprised in this beautiful musical place, he asked himself, quote, by any chance am I worthy of what I hear? Where am I? Where do I find myself? Is it possible that I am in the place of our ancient ancestors, our grandparents told about, in the land of the flowers, in the land of corn, of our flesh, of our sustenance, the flower world paradise, possibly in the land of heaven, end quote. Unsure of the answer, but finding his heart filled with a mysterious peace and joy, he looked eastward toward the top of the hill. At this point, a voice called him up. Juan Diego ascended, and there he encountered a most glorious and beautiful woman amid a radiant, otherworldly landscape where the earth itself seemed to give off light. She identified herself as the Mother of God, using 5 Nahuatl, the most common language in Mesoamerica at that time. Typically, people knew 2 languages: their narrow tribal language and the language that they could communicate a little more widely than that. This was the language that would communicate a little more widely. Terms specific to their unique understanding of God. Our Lady called out to St. Juan Diego affectionately in diminutive, quote, dear little Johnny Jimmy, my dearest son, unquote. Despite the fact that he was at 57, a distinguished older man when life expectancy was 30 to 35 on average. She told him, quote, I am the ever-perfect Holy Mary, who has the honor to be the mother of the true God by whom we all live, the creator of people, the Lord of the near and far, the Lord of heaven and earth, end quote. Our Lady said that she wanted a temple. We know now that this temple would become the very foundation of a new Mexican and a new world Christian society to arise from the ruins of its pagan past and join the new people of Mexico and the Americas to those already of the faith in Asia and Africa and Europe. In this temple, she was to reveal her Son and give him to the people. Our Lady made clear to Juan Diego that she needed him in particular, a faithful native Mexican, as her perfect servant, to say yes, to give his fiat to God and dutifully deliver her message to the bishop. Our Lady's first appearance on the morning of December 9th led Juan Diego to Bishop Zumárraga to ask for a church to be built, but without success. Our Lady visited Juan Diego for a second time, once again later the same day, and insisted that he keep trying. On December 10th, Juan Diego dutifully made a second visit to Bishop Zumárraga, who asked Juan Diego to provide him with a sign from Our Lady. 2 men working for the bishop then tried to trail Juan Diego by following him, but were prevented from doing so and lost track of him. On December 11th, Our Lady made a third visit and asked St. Juan Diego to return the following day, December 12th, today, to receive from her the sign that the bishop had requested that he provide to him. Juan Diego's uncle, Juan Bernardino, then became gravely ill to the point of death. On December 12th, fearing for his uncle's soul, Juan Diego disobeyed Our Lady and went to get a priest for his uncle instead of returning straight to Tepeyac Hill. But Our Lady intercepted him by coming down to him instead of his going up to her. She said to him, quote, listen, put it into your heart, my youngest son, that what frightened you, what afflicted you, is nothing. Do not let it disturb your face, your heart. Do not fear this sickness, nor any other sickness, nor any sharp or hurtful thing. Am I not here, I who have the honor to be your mother? Are you not in my shadow and under my protection? Am I not the source of your joy? Are you not in the hollow of my mantle, in the crossing of my arms? Do you need something more? She used words of the Aztec emperor and spoke as both mother and queen. She then sent Juan Diego to the top of Tepeyac Hill to pick flowers from what had become a miniature Garden of Eden on that holy hilltop. He picked out of season and out of country Castilian roses in December. He returned to her, and Our Lady took the flowers and arranged them for him in his tilma, his cloak, and sent him back with them to Bishop Zumárraga. Rough handing by Bishop Zumárraga's impatient, grasping servants made Juan Diego involuntarily open the tilma and drop the flowers. and thus to quite unintentionally display the image not made by human hands that we now recognize as the icon of the Virgin Theotokos of Guadalupe. Seeing the icon, the bishop fell down in homage, reverently took the tilma to his private chapel, and asked St. Juan Diego to stay in his house. The next day, they both went to Tepeyac Hill to see where the church requested by Our Lady would be built. Meanwhile, Juan Diego's uncle had been visited by Our Lady, who miraculously healed him and announced the name of her shrine to him as, quote, the perfect Virgin Holy Mary of Guadalupe, end quote. The Christian conversion of the indigenous of New Spain from 1531 to 1541 is considered the single largest conversion event in history. Almost this exact same number of people were converted in Mexico to the faith as lost the faith in Europe in the Reformation. It was a straight exchange for the most part. Juan Diego, a common saying among the Mexicans, quickly became, "May God make you like Juan Diego." Juan Diego was not chosen because he was a man of importance, a noble, or an official of the Spanish government. He was not a warrior dying in battle, nor a king, nor a woman who died in childbirth, the traditional classification of those who can enter flower world paradise. Juan Diego instead was chosen because he was a humble commoner, a baptized Christian, and someone intimately acquainted with the ancient culture and traditions of his ancestors. Despite being an unworthy commoner, Juan Diego somehow had entered into the place that his people had always hoped to travel to after death. This place of myth had suddenly, physically been experienced on earth. The heavenly realm had touched earth. The world of song story and the world of physical reality had touched. Their primal myth had become real. One can only imagine what went through the minds and hearts of the native people when they heard Juan Diego's story for the first time and knew that this place spoken of for generations had become real, and a normal human being living in their lifetime had entered it. While in the ancient myth song, the singer initially thought that he had gathered in his tilma the various beautiful, fragrant flowers, and then realized that in fact he didn't actually have them at all, Juan Diego finally, and in reality, cut and gathered the flowers and put them in the hollow of his tilma. This all-important, uniquely successful gathering of flowers into Juan Diego's tilma could only be understood by the indigenous as the flowers having been brought down from heaven. Juan Diego therefore fulfilled what the previous singer could not. A baptized commoner, not a warrior, nor a nobleman, had entered flower world paradise and physically gathered the flowers of beauty and truth. This was the pinnacle of thousands of years of yearning. Juan Diego successfully gathered the flowers, and in doing so demonstrated for all to see how it could be done by others as well. We can only imagine the poignancy of this climatic moment in the hearts of its indigenous audience. To hear that a fellow Noah was finally able to find, touch, and possess the flowers would have had no less effect than that of an earthquake on their being. Everything they had been striving for had come together and conclusively culminated with their ancient goal finally fulfilled. The tremendous hope that erupted within them was palpable. Because Juan Diego now had the flowers in his hands, he could finally succeed in sharing the flowers with the lords and princes, or in this case, Bishop Zumarraga, a prince of the Catholic Church, and by extension, all of Mexico, the Americas, and the world. Importantly, using her own hands, Our Lady had taken the flowers from Juan Diego and carefully placed them and arranged the flowers in his tilma for him. By performing this action, the Queen of Heaven and Mother of God made clear her role as a vessel and channel through which God manifests himself on earth in terms the indigenous Mexicans could easily and readily understand. Our Lady, who is the chosen conduit through whom God decided to bring about the incarnation of Jesus, thus represents the ultimate flower of truth. Just as her fiat allowed the grace of God to enter the world, her arrangement of the flowers in Juan Diego's tilma enabled the truth of Jesus to become physically manifest to the Nahua in a comprehensible way. Our Lady's command to share the flowers with the bishop and not just gather them not only fulfills the ancient pan-Mesoamerican myth of flower world, but in doing so now also conveys that a life of eternal happiness craved by their people for multiple generations is now open to all with baptism as the key. Because Juan Diego's story is set in real time and in a real place, it's no longer only mythical, but has become historical as well. And its connection to the ancient myth has become part of that myth. And by virtue of its historicity, has become a factual fulfillment of the ancient myth, in essence becoming true myth. The ancient myth and all the truths connected to it had come alive and become real, tangible, and possessible. Because Juan Diego, a Christian layman, had been made worthy to enter the flower world paradise, paradise is now available to all people, even indigenous commoners. Juan Diego's Christian baptism had immense significance for the Nahua people because clearly to them it was the key difference that made him eligible for the flower world paradise. Furthermore, the finding, gathering, and sharing the flowers was linked for all to see to the Virgin Mary and to a baptized Christian, Juan Diego. This linkage in turn enabled the indigenous Mexicans to, for the first time ever, to unequivocally trust the Franciscan friar priests without further question or reticence, realizing that the truth they had sought was now accessible through conversion and baptism. They recognized that the eternal happiness they longed for was finally within reach for all their people. Because the story of the entire Guadalupe event now had become a true myth flower song poem, the indigenous received it as knowledge given to them directly by God. In other words, they would have understood that when the singer sang the Guadalupe song poem, what they were hearing was the words of, quote, the only truth on earth, end quote. Beginning immediately within a few short years, this new, quote, only truth on earth, end quote, was widely known and sung and heard by millions of indigenous who were already familiar with flower world. Some of the research says as far north as Oregon and as far south as well into South America, this word spread. The universal response of indigenous Mexicans was immediate, sincere amendment of life. Imagine being an indigenous person living far away from the Europeans with little to no contact with them except through hearsay. Then one day you witness the Guadalupe flower song being sung and danced in the public square using the same mythological terms and language of flower world that you've known since childhood. The realization that all your hopes are now within reach would have been astonishing. To enter the flower world paradise, the Nahua understood that they needed to mirror Juan Diego's example, to be persistent, fervent in seeking salvation, and ready to make sacrifices for their conversion. The changes that occurred among the Nahua were dramatic. By the millions, they sought baptism, endured great hardship to receive baptism and other sacraments, and to worship and to receive instruction in the faith. They quickly and willingly made radical life changes that they had previously firmly rejected, so as not to be denied the sacrament. As one account stated, quote, many of them know and understand how they must be saved and make a 2 or 3 days journey to be baptized, end quote. They willingly took on any penances given to them, regardless of how difficult, painful, or impoverished it made them. In some cases, they even asked for harsher penances than they were given. The Nahua knew it was necessary to repent as well as amend their lives by repudiating many sinful traditional practices, such as idolatry, the practice of polygamy, and slavery. The Spanish were getting nowhere with most of this stuff before. Now, all of a sudden, on their own, they're a force of nature doing it. Until then, the Church's opposition to slavery and polygamy had been strongly resisted, major stumbling blocks to conversion for the indigenous Mexicans. Before the appearances of Our Lady Guadalupe, the indigenous were habitually attached to their practices of marrying multiple wives and taking many concubines. When the friars initially admonished them to stop this practice, they patently ignored them, regardless of what they were told. Multiple accounts depict a widespread practice among the indigenous who would abandon their legitimate wives in favor of the concubines they loved and with whom they had multiple children. However, after Our Lady appeared, they willingly abandoned their passionate attachments to these other wives and concubines, and even embarked on journeys spanning 45 to 60 miles to seek and reunite with their original wives, driven by their strong desire to receive baptism and align their lives with their newfound faith. Regularizing these marriages on such a large scale was a tremendously difficult task for the new priests. Think about this for a minute. It's not simply a case of you got to dump all these women and you got to go back to this woman. Something has to be provided for all the women who got dumped. That's how committed they were. They worked on it and they worked it out. They made every effort to meet the newfound enthusiasm of the native people to reform their lives. This is the few priests. Their practice of slavery was also abandoned. In 1536, in one province alone, the Indians freed over 20,000 slaves and imposed heavy penalties so that no one should anymore take slaves or buy or sell them because God's law forbids it. Now, I'm not even talking about Spanish in the New World. This is the indigenous Mexicans had lots of slaves. And they realized that slavery was out, and out it went. Their willingness to give up their slaves was a major commitment directly affecting their livelihood. Nevertheless, the people wholeheartedly gave up this practice. They even sought to ensure the freedom of slaves previously sold. If they could not buy them back for the purpose of freeing them, then they would give the friars the amount for which the slaves were sold. The friars were amazed at the level of restitution the indigenous were willing to make, even going so far as to arrange marriages for previous slaves and to help set up their livelihoods. The indigenous people expressed profound remorse for their past sins of enslaving others and through their newfound willingness to make appropriate restitution. They sought to purge and cleanse themselves of the wealth they had acquired through the unjust practice of owning slaves. There was both a widespread destruction of idols and a repudiation of witchcraft, as well by millions of indigenous newly inflamed with the true Catholic faith. Their complete about-face was profound. They went from being immersed in heavy pagan ritual practice to becoming sincere, committed, and model Christians. After 1531, millions of Nahua were willing to confess and make reparation for their sins by destroying their idols, regularizing their marriages, freeing their slaves. They clearly had an authentic desire to become Christians. In addition to reforming their lives, Nahua also embraced extreme difficulty in order to find priests to baptize them. The friars were witnesses to a remarkable and resolute commitment from the Nahua as they wholly embraced complete Christian conversion, willingly letting go of anything that could obstruct the reception of the sacraments. This sudden, intense transformation after years of efforts to convert them left the friars astonished. That's an understatement. As I said before, they were getting nowhere, and now they're beating down the door. They want to hear everything, and they want to believe it right away. With only 40 to 60 friars baptizing in New Spain, the friars innovated a method of doing mass baptisms, with the priests often having to perform mass baptisms of up to four or five times a day if they could keep up at all. Now, when word of this started to go back to Europe, I mean, don't get me started on papal politics, but when word of this started to get back, it was treated with alarm. All these people are becoming Catholics? They can't have that. They actually issued a papal bull forbidding mass baptisms and setting out all these lengthy steps that someone had to go through to become baptized. Not that the Mexicans at this point wouldn't try, but it would simply be impossible. They were being asked to do something that wasn't doable. And so the priests there, thanks be to God, ignored Rome. They just left the bull the same place where some of our bishops left the one about married priests. They just set it aside, and they just went on working with the people and giving them what they needed. God bless them all of them. And they would burn out and they'd have to get somebody else to come over, because think about it. Millions, a few dozen. Being a priest then was about as hard as it gets. Anyway, eventually, by the way, after 9 to 10 million had become baptized, the Vatican came down hard with another bull, and they had to start being really tough on baptisms. But it wasn't so bad then, because everybody was baptized. Anyway, but another day, another time. The friars in country could not in good conscience bring themselves to torture their new faithful by withholding baptism, and instead each baptized hundreds of thousands to a total of 9 to 10 million in 10 years. Although I refer you to the recorded version of last year's homily for more information about the icon of Our Lady of Guadalupe, not made with human hands, on St. Juan Diego's tilma, especially its special symbolic messages to the indigenous, I'll just mention that beneath the cincture of her mantle, in the folds over her pregnant womb, is a 4-petaled flower, a quatrefoil, the ancient symbol of the Axis Mundi, as to emphasize Our Lady Guadalupe's personal connection to the indigenous Mexicans. There is only one quatrefoil flower on the tilma, and its location is important. Mary's pregnant, these symbols are very important to the Mexicans. Mary's pregnant womb bears the symbol of Axis Mundi, indicating a portal that here is the portal between heaven and earth. In her womb is the vital intersection of the universe where heaven and earth meet. This line between our world and heaven extends from the center point of the flower and takes the viewer directly to the fruit of her womb. That is Jesus Christ, the source of all earthly beauty, truth, and goodness, and the way to paradise. The indigenous Mexicans would have seen the quatrefoil flower and understood that the lady's child, Jesus, is the portal to the ultimate divine reality. They would have understood that Mary was the bearer of the God far and near, but she was not herself God. The quatrefoil over her womb not only symbolizes Jesus Christ himself being present, but also gives a direct view of eternity, a glimpse into divine reality awaiting humanity in the next world. God's salvific plan for the Americas is shown in his planting ideas and concepts in the minds, souls, and imaginations of its peoples in a way that was unique to them. God combined the use of indigenous Mexican culture and prophecy to lead the people to the perennial truths of Christianity. Not at all syncretism or the blending of beliefs like, I don't know, but I've been told, the Mayan rite and various other things that have been in the news recently. But a bridge leading the indigenous Mexicans away from their pagan practices and toward the full embrace of Christianity. Our Lady asked for a temple to be built on the flower world mountain of Tepeyac, and in order for it to be, as it has become, a temple in the hearts of all in the Americas. We all in the Americas are the temple, offspring of that temple, and are in the offspring of that temple tonight. May our hearts and minds and souls be on fire for the faith, as were the poor, newly converted indigenous people of Mexico in 1531 and after. Hail Christ the King. Hail the Virgin Theotokos of Guadalupe. Glory to Jesus Christ.